Much for joining us on this, our third online webinar during this lockdown. Today's topic is people-to-people relations, the case of China and Africa in the wake of COVID-19. So I'm very honored to hand over to the co-director of the University of Johannesburg Centre for Africa-China Studies, Dr. David Monyae. Over to you, Dr.
And I would like to welcome all of you in all over the world. I think we have quite a number of people will be joining: Nigeria, Kenya, as well as mainland China, and some will join us along the way. I'd like to welcome all of you on behalf of our strategic partner, good friends, the University of Johannesburg Library. We have organized this series of webinar public dialogues. I think this one in particular, it's in light of events that has been taking place in the world, particularly in China lately. However, people-to-people relation, it's a concept that has been going on for a while. When you look at Africa-China relation, the people aspect is quite deep. I think it has evolved since 1955 with the Bandung Conference throughout Chairman Mao's government in China up to 1978 with the change that has been taking place in China up to now. And within Africa itself, the relationship is centered around people. And from the trenches, anti-colonialism and liberation struggle, the relationship has been now focused much more in business. I think it is going into cultural and all other aspects. However, the government-to-government relation is much strong. And as you can see, with well-established, well-entrenched, institutionalized through China-Africa Forum, as well as at the bilateral and multilateral level, where China and the entire continent work in sync and agree on a host of global issues, including the current COVID-19 issues, in terms of relation, assistance, both sides, Africa assisting China, as well as China getting assistance from the continent. But one of the missing gap in this relation where we fit in is the people-to-people dimension. That as much as we have progressive policies at government level, which are in no question, as well as in business and in activities that the Chinese people and African people are engaged in, there seem to be a lack of ordinary people exchanges at continental level as well as in China. That as much as we at policy level, we all excel at elite level, it appears with recent events that there are indeed issues with the lack of knowledge of each other, with lack of communication and proper channel. And this is also taking place in an era at a geopolitical level where the tension between Washington and Beijing is worsening the situation. So the recent events have been handled at the government-to-government level. And in our view, we thought of putting together a public dialogue of this nature to allow African as well as Chinese to speak to each other on the dynamism of people to people and looking at what are the gaps which are there, if there are any. And that's what brought us to this specific discussion. I'll kick in with three scholars that we have, and I think much has already been said. If you have questions, write on the side, what you call the chat section. You can write your question. We're going to allow our main speakers to have 10 minutes each, and then we'll start with Professor Siphamandla Zondi. Professor Siphamandla Zondi is a very close and strategic partner for University of Johannesburg and the Center for Africa-China Studies. In particular, we have worked quite closely with Professor Zondi in a number of areas. He specializes in BRICS, international relations. He's a professor at the University of Pretoria, and he's a well-established, particularly on the issues of China as well as BRICS. So without any further ado, Professor Zondi, 10 minutes for you, and then we'll move to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, colleagues. It's an honor to have this conversation. I want to greet all our guests that are on the platform right now, and appreciate the center for hosting us together with the library for this conversation. And of course, I know that this conversation takes place against a particular backdrop. What makes a discussion about China-Africa relations right now has to do partly with issues unrelated to China and Africa, but quite a lot of them to do with China's role in the world, its position, and especially at the time when it is engaged in, is involved in, entangled in a heavy and quite damaging geopolitical battle with the United States. And that has brought the issue of China-Africa to the fore. When the subject of China-Africa actually boomed in the late 1990s with the work of Ian Taylor, Gart Lepierre, Gart Shelton, Kweku Ampia, and a few of other colleagues, it was also related to how the United States was framing the debate about moving from multipolarity towards what it called uni-multipolarity. In other words, a multipolarity which recognizes the United States as an indispensable power in the world. Thirdly, that boom would receive a huge boost in the 2000s. And that would be related to a simultaneous beginning of the AGOA, African Growth and Opportunities Act framework that the United States had towards Africa, and the FOCAC, the Forum for Africa and China Cooperation at the same time. And that catapulted the issue of Africa-China, role of China, the intentions of China in Africa, Africa's interest back, and Africa's game change, and the nature of this relationship, the structure of this relationship, the extent of this relationship, whether it's the status, whether it's beyond state, was given impetus by that in a significant way. And then comes in 2008, the global financial crisis. And the global financial crisis happened. You will see, and we look at the publications on China-Africa, start to boom again. Because among many questions about the global financial crisis, the global neoliberal order, among questions about neo-imperial designs over Africa, questions about how to deal with global poverty and African experience of it and inequality and all of that. Among those questions would come a question related to then in this context, what are the emerging powers doing in Africa? Are they treating Africa differently? Is Africa itself planning on them differently from how it needs to plan with every so-called strategic partner? And in that context, the question of China and what it is positioning itself for also arises. And now again, COVID-19 and it having first been picked up in China, spreading to Europe and North America, and through that come to Africa. Because for us, we got COVID-19 not from China. We got it from Europe and from the US. Our first case in South Africa came from Italy. The first two cases in Cameroon, in Congo, in Togo came from France. The first cases in Tanzania, in Kenya, came from Italy and from France. So this dynamics, besides this dynamics aside, the question of China and how we're going to position ourselves in this tension between China and the West and blaming each other and all that battle, then comes in that context the question about what is South Africa saying, what is Africa saying about this? How is Africa linked to all of this? And where is the relationship between China and Africa? I would like to argue that the long-standing dynamics about this relationship in our analysis continue just as they were in the 1990s, they continue to be. I want to suggest that these dynamics, the huge literature, the huge archive, related to 6 things very quickly that I can talk to very quickly. The first one is that the relationship between China and Africa is framed by the coincidence of emergence. China is emerging as an economy, not just as an economy, as an economic player, but as a geopolitical player. In the period 1980s, 1990s, Africa is emerging also from the doldrums of the Cold War, the doldrums of neoliberal stranglehold, the doldrums of structural adjustment, and begins to assert itself and talks about the 21st century as the African continent in the same period. So there is a coincidence of emergence that happens between the two. And that structural making of the world, for me, has a lot more bearing than the individual process that they made. That they emerge at the same time, and that puts them in the same port. And on the basis of that, they respond by looking for ways to relate. But it is a function of the systemic dynamics that are happening in the world. The world is seeing tectonic shift. They're looking for new meaning. There's now a good talk about a post-Western world. They're all trying to find a meaning in that, and that brings them together at a deeper level. So there's a emergence, but the emergence is not similar. The emergence of China is huge, it's massive, it's very economic, innovating on an existing neoliberal economic order, not outside it, but innovating within it. The African one is a bit belligerent, may not be very united, and I thought there's various strands of it, but it's an emergence from a very low base. And that emergence is an emergence of not a single entity, because Africa is not a country, but an entity of 55 countries Africans never made. The second one is that there is divergence of emergence, therefore. So the second factor about the emergence, not that the emergence are diverse, the forms of emergence are diverse, but there is divergence in the actual emergence. The manner in which China is emerging to take a particular posture in geostrategic, geoeconomic, geopolitical space and locating itself right at the center. And China as part of the P5 and China taking its place closer to the center, perhaps to take over from the center, is very different from an emergence of Africa, which is seeking to continue to untangle itself from the strangleholds that are limiting its emergence. So the emergence is not the same. It is emergent on both sides, but of a different nature. We can elaborate on that. And if you look at it, for example, the establishment of FOCAC as a platform, it was meant to try and find a convergence in this emergence, which is different, to find a way in which you could find commonalities and then de-emphasize the differences in this thing. So all the attempts or the strategic engagement between China and Africa is an attempt to, I think it's out of realization that there's emergence happening at the same time, coinciding, but emergence is not the same. And an attempt to converge around, for example, maybe finding a script where there is mutual benefit for the two, where there is focus on areas that Europeans have not focused on, infrastructure development, finding a way to make this emergence sustainable in ways, convergence on global reform and the need for global reform, but not quite convergence on the UN, on the reform of the United Nations Security Council, by the way, and all of that stuff. So there is also, you see, divergence of emergence that is now playing itself out with the COVID-19. China is emerging out of COVID-19 to take advantages, become a manufacturer of things that are needed to recover, designing programs, trying to lead in terms of policy innovation, and that, as you saw, President Xi Jinping spoke about the debt servicing framework that put before the World Assembly that was adopted. So China there's also divergence in the manner in which we emerge, even out of this COVID-19. There's also divergence in response. South Africa and China are not responding in similar way, both to the global economic crisis before, to the general global environment. I refer to the UN reform, for example, but also to COVID-19. There are divergences there. We can talk to them because we don't want to run out of time. But there is convergence also in response to this, especially in relation to solidarity, to importance of international cooperation, importance of the multilateral system, the importance of a concerted effort to respond to a global problem. There is divergences in relation to use of technology, capacity of health systems, legacies, and all of that. There is convergence in approach in relation to a society-wide thing. And then lastly, this issue of a flare-up of incidents in China of Africans, especially Africans in, I think, in the southern part of China, of prejudice being displayed against them in shopping centers, in all of this, must be understood in the context that there is absolute convergence in emergence in many ways, but there's also divergence in this emergence. And this divergence is not only about the size of economy, but it also about the fact that while, as David indicated, while the states understand each other, they have one mind, they work very hard with each other, the people-to-people dimension may not follow that. We've known that for a long time. A lot of negative news about the Chinese and importation of Chinese labor, the abuse of people in Chinese companies out of Africa. It's been in the news now for over 15 years. Of course, we know that part of that may be fired up also by the West, also trying to give us a narrative about China. But there are real challenges facing Africa. Okay. So lastly, just as
don't component.
The question of prejudice applies to China as it applies to every part of the world. And the sooner the Chinese realize that they too have a possibility of suffering this global problem of attitudes, of racist attitude, or prejudice, the better that they will do that. Instead of defending and denying, we need to embrace that there is a problem here, it must be solved. Just as we Africans also discriminate against the other people sometimes, in certain situations, we have to resolve it. But because of the unequal relationship, Chinese need to take this very seriously so that you increase the convergence and decrease the divergence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Zondi. I think some of these issues will come up as we go a bit later. Let me take this opportunity to welcome Professor Cheng. She's an assistant professor at the Department of Asian and African Language and Culture at Peking University. Her research interests including public culture in Africa, African visual and performance arts, cultural interaction between China and Africa, and so on. Her PhD awarded by SOAS in London School in 2016 focused on the transformation of theater and culture in urban Nigeria. Without any further ado, Professor Cheng, 10 minutes as well. The floor is yours.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm joining you here from Johannesburg. I came to visit my family here in Joburg, and now, as you know, we are all locked down here. And I want to thank Dr. Monyae for organizing this timely seminar, as all of us have perhaps already realized that ever since the explosive global outbreak of the coronavirus, we've seen an emergence of xenophobic sensations, prejudice, and exclusion towards certain groups of people across the world. I believe that our current times of quarantine and isolation does provide the best opportunity for us to reflect on how we understand our relationship with each other, how categories of race, nationality, political systems, ideologies, histories, and languages have defined and are continuously defining our perceptions of self and other. Perhaps a bit different from what Prof. Zondi has just shared with us. My discussion today is more of based on a very personal reflection of my own research experiences in African art and popular culture, as well as the experiences of teaching African cultures in China. I want to propose 3 dimensions, namely small stories, common histories, and mutual references, to explain how I understand people-to-people interactions in the context of Africa-China relations. So what is at stake when we talk about people-to-people interactions, and why does it matter in today's context of China-Africa interaction in an era of COVID-19? For me, people-to-people relation really depends on how we understand each other, more importantly through the esteem of the ordinary people's everyday life, and through how we interpret each other's culture, which is always the foundation of any interactions. Forms of othering and exclusion are also a result of stereotypical and biased understanding of others' culture. That being said, I think we need to focus on the unofficial layers and the small stories on the ground, expressed by everyday people that might question or challenge the meta-narratives that we so often take for granted. I want to start with an image taken by my Chinese photographer friend, Li Dong. Perhaps, I don't know whether you could see it clearly in the picture. We see a businessman from Angola whose name is Tyler. He's sitting in the living room of an apartment which he rented in Guangzhou, the so-called third world capital in southern China. Perhaps you've noticed that in the photo there's something very unique. There's a portrait hanging on the wall above the television. When asked why he chose to hang the portrait of Chairman Mao Zedong in his room, Tyler told Li Dong that he believed in China, the spirit of Mao will bless him and his business. Well, for me, this image, as well as a recent photograph series by Cameroonian-born Nigerian photographer Samuel Fossel are extremely illuminating, because they reject a flattened representation of China-Africa discourses and imply the complex interweavement of historical and contemporary dimensions in this relation. What I want to address here is that these works urge us to go back to the history of Afro-Asian solidarity since the Bandung Conference, which was often hidden from the mainstream Western historical discourses. Well, in recent years, we've seen scholars like Lydia Liu and Yan Hairong have brought us brought our attention to the important history of Afro-Asian interactions between the 1950s and 60s. In these scholarly works, we find that more than half a century ago, the Bandung Conference and its humanism spirit had already pointed out the importance of cultural collaboration between Asia and Africa. For instance, the importance of acquiring knowledge about each other's countries, promoting mutual cultural exchanges, and contesting against racism and imperialism. There have been important cultural, intellectual movements among the formerly colonized countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, the so-called Third World. So for instance, as we know, Chinua Achebe's work and many other African scholars were translated to Chinese as early as the early 1960s. So in these visual art practices and scholarly work, there is a strong insistence on historical and cultural past, as well as the lived reality of the local communities. In this sense, I find them quite relevant to our discussions today. I think it is right time for us to link the current context of the continuously changing geopolitics to historical discourses, to question or challenge the framework of nation state, the categories of race and ideologies that we so often adopt to identify self and other. So nowadays, how do we generate more contextualized reading of Africa-China relations, and how do we rebuild the more grassroots friendship of people-to-people interactions like we used to do during and after the Bandung era? I think we can find some answers perhaps through education, through intellectual work that we do every day as scholars and researchers. Learning from African writers such as Chimamanda Adichie and Binyawanga Wainaina, I always tell our students in China that we should be vigilant of repeating the single story in the process of understanding Africa. We should always reflect on how our knowledge of Africa is constructed and where they come from. So that is why at the beginning of our seminars in recent classes, we start with works by African scholars such as Vivai Mudibe, Chika Anta Diop, and Ngugi wa Thiong'o. We also invite African scholars such as Bian Njeifo or Timi Fasan. And also you can see in the image South African poet Natalia Molebatsi to talk about contemporary popular culture and literature in our classroom in China. So here we want to emphasize the importance of teaching similarities, connections rather than difference, and using teaching as a way of intellectual practice. So one of the reasons that we are doing this is we hope that through these teaching and researching experiences, we can rethink some of the following questions. For instance, do these discussions on mutual historical and contemporary experiences inform new ways of talking to an alternative other instead of the metropolitan center? Do these suggest possibilities of creating a critical space for ongoing conversations between intellectuals in different third world locations? So I think I would use a little bit of time to quote a few African scholars. I think what they said are still quite useful for us in our understanding of people-to-people interactions in our contemporary context. As Indian scholar Arundhati Roy has recently said that historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. She also said that the epidemics push the hidden things to the front. So I think it is the right time to listen to small stories, to go back to the histories and challenge the existing frameworks of how we define self and other in the context of China-Africa interaction. For instance, in China, we urgently need a serious public education and discussion on topics of race, and do this without being defensive. And perhaps all we should remember what Prof. Wolesho Inca had reminded us. In order to transmit the self-apprehension of a race, a culture, it is necessary to liberate from and relate this collective awareness to the values of others. I believe that through education, intellectual work, and public debates and discussions like this, we may create multiple possibilities of thinking and talking about the future of China-Africa, a future once Frantz Fanon had imagined for us, a future in which we do not want to catch up with anyone. We must invent and we must make discoveries. Okay, I think that is all, pretty much everything I want to share today. So back to you, Dr. Monyae, and I look forward to the discussion later.
Thank you, Prof. Let me take this opportunity once more to welcome my very good friend who is speaking from China. It's almost midnight, so if he looks sleepy, we will understand. It's midnight. Professor Quinn was born in April 1970 in Wuhan, China, holds a PhD in international relations and master's in communication. He's a senior researcher fellow at the Institute of One Belt, One Road at Yatsen University. He's a former director of international office, the current director of the international office at Zhongshan School of Medicine, Yatsen as well. He was the former Chinese director for the Confucius Institute at University of Cape Town, and a very great friend of our institute. Prof, 10 minutes as well.
All right, okay, thank you, David. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar. So I think that a webinar is a common media of... Hi, anybody can hear me? Okay, sure. So because I'm based in Guangzhou, I'm an academic in Zhongshan University. So I think that I'm in the best position to explain the situation of recent events of South Africa in China, in southern part of China, especially Guangzhou, because Guangzhou, the nickname of Guangzhou is the capital of the third world, because Guangzou is a city that most Africans choose to settle, choose to pursue the study and choose to business with Chinese partners, and also the ideal city for Africans to realize the Chinese dreams. So I think that if you can have an opportunity to visit Guangzou, you can have many opportunities to meet and interact and your compatriots especially in some blocks in Guangzhou, especially in some parts in Yueshu and in Baiyun district. So these two districts, most Africans are congregate in these two areas. And I want to share with you the basic information, the basic statistics of COVID-19 among Africans in Guangzhou, and also the misinformation of Western media, and then my reflection. So before the end of April, the total of 132 in China's southern city of Guangzhou tested positive for COVID-19. So among them, 19 were imported cases, according to the reports from the Vice Mayor of Guangzhou, and a total of 4,533 African people in the city had undergone nucleic acid testing since April the 4th. And the so-called, the Western media coverage about the Africans events in Guangzhou mostly are allegations leveled by US diplomats and also some African diplomats. So they complain that persons of color in Guangzhou were subjected to forceful testing for COVID-19 and quarantine, and also ill treatment. And according to my memory, last month, a group of 7 American ambassadors write to the state councilor, Mr. Wang Yi, to complain the so-called discrimination. The reported incidents include the Africans were being injected from the hotel in the middle of a night, and also deportation or arrest. I think that this information, because this information are in Western media. So China, according to my understanding, China treats all foreigners equally. It is irresponsible and immoral for the US to sow discord. And I think that it is a very bad attempt to drive a wedge between China and Africa. I think the attempt never will succeed. And I think that, so the equal treatment, two aspects can be involved in the equal treatment. The one aspect that China and the foreigners are all equal, and all foreigners in China are all equal, right? And I think that in Chinese histories, we have some the xenophobia and also the hatred between China and other people from other from other countries, especially Tang Dynasty and the Yuan Dynasty. But this also can be involved in class clash and class struggle between them. And I think that Chinese people in the world, in this world, Chinese people are most tolerant. We are tolerant to all people, to all ethnic background, to all cultural background, and to all and belief. So in this time, in this pandemic era, in this pandemic situation, I think we must treat all people equally. Because if you are tolerant, Chinese people are tolerant, but the virus are not tolerant. The opposite, it will kill you, right? So we must do all the self-quarantine and also the testing thoroughly and fairly to all people. Especially, I think that there might be some cultural misunderstanding between Chinese people and other people from other cultural background. So from the statistics and from the statistic and the scholar reports that because of the etiquette, social etiquette, the different interaction manner and the different table manner, so the pandemic and also the transmission of transmission of of a pandemic is quite different. So you know that in China, because we have a very strict rule of the social distancing, so we have cut the link of this pandemic. So I think that there might be, we call on the understanding from all the African colleagues. So I think that after the pandemic is over, I think that the African people in Guangzhou will thankful to the Guangzhou municipal government that due to the strict and the rigorous rules of the self-quarantine and also the testing, that the situation is checked and also controlled. The pandemic is controlled, and I think that people know that China is the most safest world in this world, because that the pandemic is also totally blocked. And I think that I must admit that there's some cases that because of the language, the misunderstanding and communication and also cultural differences, I think that the different the city mayors of Guangzhou, we have different levels of communication with African counterparts. That there might be some cases that some African people are not treated fairly, but I think that if you take a you attitude, you will understand. So Guangzhou municipal government measures is totally beneficent to all foreigners, to all African colleagues in Guangzhou, also in other parts of the city. So I think that if you take a you attitude, that you can have understanding that the people who work in the front line, in the battle line of COVID-19, that because they are sacrifice their own life to save your life, because they are the soldiers without guns, right? Because the pandemic, the virus, is totally unknown to all of us. So we must fully understand all the behaviors, the measures they take to check the link of the transmission of this virus. because this unknown enemy, we do not know its link, we do not know its origin, we do not know its the vehicle of transmission. I think that all the measures and all the policies taken by the government is feasible and rational to check the transmission of this pandemic.
Thank you very much, Prof, for your input. I think we have now come to a stage where we would like to open to all participants who have questions. I think we have two, but before I do that, there is quite a lot of issues that are on the table. And I think this platform gives us a golden opportunity to communicate Africans and Chinese without anyone else mediating, as the case at the moment. I think for me, at a personal level, indeed there are issues. I think any good relationship you always have all the good things, but at times you also have problems. So in my own experience, I can tell you that there are huge issues that need to be resolved on all parties within China, which is being acknowledged by Chinese officials, African diplomats on the ground, as much as on the African continent. Even in South Africa, there has been question of racism against Chinese raised, including an MEC here in Gauteng that has been called names and things like that. And some of these issues are real, others are imagined, and as all speakers have mentioned, has to be understood within a much more broader context, geopolitics, but more importantly, it raises questions in terms of what is lacking in the relationship. And to what extent can we take advantage of the situation to ensure that both parties learn more deeper about each other. I've been to China more than 30 times, and I've been telling my Chinese colleagues, in all those 30 times, I think 25 to 28 times, I also have been stopped at the immigration office, not by immigration officers, but just junior officers. As you go through immigration, go through the customs, and a junior officer would then say, where you show me your invitation letter, let me search your bag. Something that I also equally see here in South Africa, when I come back with my Chinese colleagues, they are equally stopped by junior officers and questioned, and their bags searched. So this raises a bigger question, that there are indeed a lack of understanding of each other and certain perceptions that are there that need to be aired in the open without any agenda, and as good friends, be very frank with each other. So I'd like to raise the two questions which have been raised, but I just want to find out, is there anyone who has a question that we could add? Baso, I think you identified two questions that we have. The very first one.
So, I've got about 3 so far, but they can keep coming, and then we'll take them in as.
The very first one, I think it comes, I'd like to know how to promote the Bangdang humanism spirit, even African literature and arts beyond university classrooms. Can you share some good civil practices with us, both in China and among Chinese diaspora around the world? I think this is directed to Professor Cheng.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for the question. And I think from my own perspective, I can share with that recently, I think there's an emergence of interest of Chinese publishers who are very interested in publishing African authors' works. We have a long list and even a small database of how many works, literary works, novels, dramas have been translated to Chinese. And then secondly, I think from the perspective of someone who works in an educational institution, in our own institution, especially in disciplines of African culture studies and African literature studies, we encourage students to learn at least one indigenous languages from Africa and try their best to read those literary works in native languages, and also work with even African scholars, as I mentioned, literary critics, scholars in different departments from African universities, work with those scholars and think with those scholars. And also, I think in general, to promote African culture and promote African literary work in China, I would see a potentiality in the exchanges, further exchanges between the youth, not only scholars, but young people between Africa and China. I do think, with that being said, I do think this is going to be a long-term project. That we couldn't finish it or push it within a short while, and I do see hopes when seeing so many different institutions and universities in China have recently established centers on African studies or departments of African literary and culture studies. It used to be, in my mind, in my opinion, I think it used to be a gap, but nowadays we are paying more and more attention to it.
There's a second question, which, Baso, if I'm all right, it is to do with the two different cultures. There's African culture and Chinese culture. Is there any way of understanding maybe the similarities and differences between the two? It's quite a general question. Is there any other question that is here?
Thank you very much for stimulating discussion and debate. My question is really how we problematize the role of social media in reporting these matters that we are discussing. It would be interesting to hear how that has a major impact in both public perception, but also in how we can reverse, because often some of the instances and issues have been found to be untrue. I have experience where I was in Zanzibar for a Commonwealth parliamentary meeting, and some of the anger about South Africa was arising from what people were producing by social media, many of which were actually unrelated completely to South Africa, belonged to a different part of the country, but some of them were old but were being recycled on social media to shape opinions of people. I just want to have a view on that matter in influencing the China-Africa relationship and how people propose we handle it.
The speaker is our Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly. So we are really indeed honored to have a senior member of parliament joining us. Can any one of our speakers please answer the question or just give an input? Perhaps may I start with Dr. Zondi?
Yes, Chairperson. I think it's simply because the questions we are talking about, the relationship between China and Africa, is happening in the context of geopolitical contestation. In a world that has been contested by the West that controls it right now, fearing that another might take over. They fear what might call a China-centric or Sino-centric worldview. And given the fact that a lot of that battle takes place in not just in formal institutions and negotiations behind closed doors, but also in the court of public opinion, it is very obvious that then we must be able to distinguish between very legitimate complaints that are happening, very legitimate issues that are being raised. None of the countries involved are angels. They all have to deal with issues and all of that, but there is legitimate concerns about them. But there is also facilitated anger. There is also facilitated negativity. You would be fools if you haven't read the geopolitics in all of these things. In 2014, the National Intelligence Commission of the United States releases Global Trends 2030. In it underlines the importance of an information warfare and how it will use it in order to assert itself. So what I'm saying is there are complaints that are genuine, but there are also moves by the Western media to fight its own battles and use us as Africa to fight its own battles. I mean, you will all have seen just 2 weeks ago the US Secretary of State saying that China is trying to use Africa. But in the same statement, he talks about the help they are going to be giving to different African countries. So he doesn't see contradictions. So Africa, for as long as Africa remains in this position that it is, there's always a possibility that the powerful would use it against each other or use it for their own end.
Yeah, perhaps let me also add, I had the privilege of working for our national parliament, and I know for sure that South African parliament has close relationship with the Chinese parliament, and perhaps with the involvement of policymakers, even in this debate, it's high time that there is that need to domesticate our own foreign policy, particularly the Africa-China. I think this gives us an opportunity to take these debates far beyond this platform to ensure that ordinary people, I think through their representatives, can change ideas, understand each other's culture, and deal with these issues much more in depth and take it away from the geopolitical and just economy and politics at the highest level. So I think I'm grateful that we're joined by policymakers. We have one more question that I think Professor Cheng could answer. It's on films. I don't know if you've seen the question.
I have not. Can you please repeat the question?
Sure. Basso, do you have the question next to you?
Sure. So the question is, how can African filmmakers and musicians and people in those industries become more competitive in terms of accessing the Chinese market? Then the person suggests that perhaps this could be done through BRICS. So maybe both Prof. Cheng and Prof. Zondi could tackle the question.
Yeah, I think that is a very good question. What I do in my course in China is actually teaching about popular culture, because in the past, I think I realized there's a gap of how we teach about African culture. Every time in China, when people talk about African culture and African art, it always has to do with masks, with things associated to traditional tribal culture. And I've been writing about this and been arguing that we need, in terms of cultural exchange, we need to focus on the more contemporary level, and we need to encourage the participation of people on the ground, rather than official layers, rather than exclude it to the official layers. And also, I think the role we speak about social media just now. I think the social media could also play an important role in this cultural exchanges. For instance, we could use different channels or companies on one level, companies or social enterprises like the Star Times. I don't know whether you've ever heard about it. They have, on one hand, accesses to popular culture forms, popular culture materials, musicians, artists from Africa. And on the other hand, they have access to also Chinese. They are more familiar with the Chinese context. They have access to Chinese audiences. So I think I see a potential in companies like this who has been involved in the China-Africa interactions. And on the other hand, I think it should be based on, from the long-term perspective, I think it should be based on a more mutual understandings of each other. That is the foundation of how we could, in the future, involve or know more about imports, as the question referred to. It imports more forms of popular African culture in China. And I do see, for instance, lots of young people, students in my class, when we learn about hip hop music in China, when we talk about how Afrobeat music, like Fela Kuti's music have influenced us, they do show a very deep interest in this. So I see great potentialities in this. But speaking about the specific methodologies of promoting this, I need to think more about this, and I hope to get back to you later.
Sure, thank you. May I also invite, we have my brother Muhammad Ali, if you would like to say a few words. Dr. Osidipe, I think Dr. Osidipe is originally from Nigeria, based in China. Are you on the platform?
Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, okay, I just want to say, because I stay in China, my contribution is just simple. Looking at the background of what has been happening recently, and against the background of COVID-19 and the various misinformation that's been going on, my own input is that Africa and China must use this opportunity, the platform of this pandemic, as an opportunity to strengthen the existing relationship between the two sides. Why? Because this is a very, very critical time when the test of friendship comes up between the two sides. The test of true friendship is actually adversity, not prosperity. We have seen a lot of things that has happened, good things between China and Africa. And this is not the time that China will become the enemy to Africa in our view, because of information flying around. The previous speaker, Professor Siphamandla, just talked about geopolitics, the Western geopolitics, and the influence of it on the China-Africa relations. We must always see the work in the background, the geopolitics at work in the background, every time we want to analyze any negative narrative that is portraying China as an enemy of Africa, or Africa as and China being at loggerheads. We are partners in progress, but the only way we can strengthen this is through more emphasis on people-to-people exchanges, people-to-people relations, cultural exchanges, media exchanges, movies, culture. Like we have in China, we hardly see African movies on Chinese channels. These are areas we can actually explore. They are intangibles, but we can actually explore them in promoting understanding between China and Africa through movies, through cultural exchanges, through people exchanges. We've had enough of official exchanges, government to government level between China and Africa. We can strengthen the relationship at the people to people level. This way we can be able to smoothen our relationship. There are areas of misunderstanding can easily be addressed without much sentiment, like what we have seen recently, talking about the Guangzhou issue. What happened in Guangzhou was purely as a result of misunderstanding, which shouldn't have been if we have had a lot of exchanges between us. But we still have enough time with us as Africans and as Chinese to increase or to strengthen the relationship using this platform of this pandemic to do that, so that we can emerge stronger after the whole thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My brother in Shanghai, Dr. Ming, can you please a few words? And I'm mindful of a question from Naledi. Dr. Zondi, if you check on the questions, I think you could answer it. Can I start with Dr. Ming from Shanghai?
David, could you everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, because the rest of time is limited, so I think I would only provide two of my personal inputs here. I think the first one is that I think in order to make our bilateral cooperations, especially as for the people-to-people and the cultural exchanges better, I think maybe it's time for both sides to produce the so-called new kinds of new kinds of good stories. Why? Because in the past, when we talk about the partnerships between us, we like to talk about China's back to the United Nations due to the support of African brothers and sisters, and also the Tatazara railways. But that has been almost 50 years older stories. And now the new generations in Africa, in China has been there. How we could let the younger brothers and sisters pass through the older partnerships since our older generation leaders? I think we need to invent the new stories, which could be popular and inspiring to both sides. We should not only repeat the old stories. And secondly, I think that now it has been a very unique historical moment for both sides to have some innovative and also practical ways to promote our bilateral relations. Why? I say that this has been a very unique historical moment, because now due to the global lockdown, due to this kind of coronavirus, the direct people-to-people visitors has been stopped. And I think at least as for until this year, the direct visit between China and Africa will be reduced to the lowest levels compared in the past years. So I think such kind of internet seminars would be the most frequent forms. But I think would that be the only ways for both of us to have such kind of information exchanges? I think that would be one of the ways, not just the only ways, because we have. That's why I say that we need to have some more ways, more innovative ways to have more deeper exchanges, not just by screen to screens. Because several years ago, my leaders has asked one of his senior scholar friend of other countries. She asked her foreign friend, why you still like to travel around the world instead of emails and internet meetings? And her friend said that compared to the internet exchanges, face-to-face exchanges would made me know your country is deeper than just the internet news. So I wonder that during this kind of never seen before global lockdown, how we could have some better and new ways to promote such kind of good exchanges. I think that would be our new tasks. That's my 2 inputs. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Professor Zondi?
Yes, a quick one. The reason why, the issue about the news, and I saw it also in the social, actually saw it in the social media rather than in the mainstream media, about the harassment of Africans in Guangzhou, where a diplomat even intervened, highlights for us that whatever the intentions of governments, including our own governments, attitudes, including attitudes of discrimination, get accentuated by a perception of threat, a crisis that is taking place. As we have known, the UN has already indicated to us that the COVID-19, as crisis before it, has led to a rise of intolerance, of attitude against others. Because when human beings face existential threat, they look at a weaker other or as someone who's different, because they are human beings trying to deal with it. Because remember, fear is not a rational incident. It's not a rational thing. But fear is a irrational response to a problem that is. It would be very astounding for the Chinese to be the only people who don't confront this problem. And I think in a way, we're very unfair to expect that the problem that has been called global would exist everywhere, and it would not exist among other Chinese when they are faced with something. What would be a problem is when state actors, the state itself, get involved in such activities, then it's a problem, or fails to act in such situations. But the possibility that people, random people all over, shop owners and all that may have that, is something we're having here in Soweto. We're having it here right where we are. It is for this reason that in 2001, at a conference hosted in Durban, in South Africa, the United Nations, the nations of the world, 190 of them, agreed, literally, everybody signed for it, all of us signed for it, that there is a grave concern about the fact that though there are efforts of nations and of the international community to eradicate racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related forms of intolerance, this problem continues 3 decades after the process started. They all owned up to the fact that these problems would end, but it becomes a problem when the state enables it, a state, there is no evidence I have seen that indicates and implicates the government of China, for example, at any level being involved in this. But I did see those things. It simply means the Chinese need to, like the rest of us, know that these things can happen, but there must be processes in place to make sure that nothing is done in the name of my country, which is negative. So the quick speed with which you deal with those, and you're transparent about what was done in those particular cases, or the investigations were done, and everything was dealt with, especially the one where it involved a diplomat, because a diplomat is saying, I'm intervening in defense of this group of people. It's normal. It's just what is happening right now. But the Chinese have faced it, and they need to rule it out, and we need to rule it out. Actually, we have even a bigger problem. We had huge problems of xenophobia in this country and on this continent, in a number of parts of the continent. In the West, the question of racism, racial, is a huge problem. So it's a global problem that must be tackled at every level, and states must show their seriousness in dealing with them. But we do not say, because we heard somebody clapped somebody's face in a village nearby, then that village is worse than us. Because we too have people clapping each other. But it's about how you respond to this issue so that they are not seen to be institutionalized and legitimized by state actors. But we need our Chinese colleagues not every time when they hear it, immediately dismiss it as wrong, as a narrative of others. It is better to say it is a global problem. We do not want to suggest that we are unique. We don't have a global problem. It only exists everywhere. But we need to investigate what it is and isolate those incidents that are actually the work of our geopolitical enemies trying to paint us in the bad name. But we don't just dismiss it in offhand, because there might be actually people who've experienced it, because human beings are human beings. The Chinese are human beings too.
Thank you. We are winding off. I'm going to give the next three people a minute each. I have Dr. Abdul Lamine, who is in France. Dr. Abdul Lamine works for UNESCO, but he's speaking in his personal capacity. Dr. Lamine?
Yeah, okay, thank you. I think you put me on the spot. I was actually enjoying the discussion very much, and I did not want to take the floor. However, once I'm called upon, I think I'm forced to say a word or two. It's very nice to hear my good friend, Dr. Zondi, articulating issues as always. This is quite an interesting conversation, and I think many of the speakers, in fact, almost all of them, have situated the current situation in a global context and tried to sort of bring geopolitical dynamics into it. And I think for me, one of the takeaways from this conversation is to say that the pandemic itself provides an opportunity at many levels, obviously in terms of reconfiguring or reshaping China-Africa relations as we move forward. But I'm just curious. I know in a conversation like this, it is not always safe to play a devil's advocate. But I think all of you analysts would agree with me that for the longest time now, I think Zondi was quite right that if you want to look at the current situation now, you probably have to go back maybe 20 years and see how China-Africa relations has evolved. The other colleague actually went all the way back to Bandung. But let's just say we go back to the last 20 years. It seems to me, for the most part, and I'm curious more to hear from the African commentators, but maybe our Chinese colleagues can also weigh in here. It seems to me that for the most part, when we analyze the relationship between Africa and China, and obviously bringing the West, it's almost as if there is a binary kind of approach in our analysis. In other words, there is a view that seems to say, well, it is probably good for us to have the Chinese now as major players, so that gives Africa more options. So it's either or. But I'm wondering, in all of this conversation, I mean, what is the common? There is a common Africa position when it comes to how the African Union has been reconfigured and how it's been constructed moving forward. So when we engage on the global stage, we obviously come in as a collective. But within that collective also, there are individual national interests that sort of sometimes that they may be at cross purposes what the regional imperatives are. So really, if Africa is going to look at this pandemic as an opportunity to reshape its relations with China and other power centers, how do we distill a uniquely African interest that seems to inform the way we engage, as opposed to an engagement dynamic where the interests are defined by external actors, whether it's China or whether it's the United States or whether it's Europe. In other words, what I'm really struggling to put across is to say, how do we define the African interest, whether it is as a collective or or perhaps even if you want to limit it to individual countries, I mean, you can take South Africa, for instance, so that when you engage with China, when you engage with Japan, when you engage with Vietnam, it is that uniquely African interest that informs how we engage as opposed to the other way around. I don't know if I made myself clear.
Very clear, Dr. Lamin. I hope you are safe in Paris. Let me come Dr. Weston. Can you hear me?
Yes, Prof, I can hear you.
Just a minute, yeah, please. We are winding off, and I have one last person.
Okay, thanks. Prof, I'll just take 1 minute and I'll quickly say what I have to say. Thanks, the panelists and colleagues. The point I wish to put across is that if we depart from the premise that Africa-China relations are based on mutual benefits, they are win-win, and they are meant to be a departure from the kind of relationship Africa has had with the West. So if this relationship is defined as different from the relationship that Africa has had, when Africans raise issues, there could be Africans on the ground, there could be diplomats like the Nigerian diplomat who was captured in China raising issues pertaining to the kind of treatment Africans were subjected to. We deny Africans agency, the same kind of treatment Africans have experienced while dealing with the West, that they can only raise these issues because they have been incited by the West against the Chinese. But then if we're relating on a mutual benefit as equal partners, a relationship of win-win, then I have to respect what my party is saying. And as Professor Zondi said, I honor and I acknowledge that you have got genuine concerns which I'll look into, but it can't be that we poo-poo genuine concerns, genuine issues, attendant to this relationship, because we know geopolitical relationships are always fraught with challenges. That's axiomatic. So we can't romanticize the relationship between China and Africa, and we kind of minimize the challenges they are in by invoking the West. If the West treated us shabbily, then it can't justify. If we raise concerns, then those concerns are minimized and cold water is poured on those challenges. I think as scholars and commentators, we have to be aware of that we're relating on a mutual benefit, and therefore it can be, as Dr. Lamin said, that it's some kind of a dichotomy that we choose between the West and China. It's about our interests, about the well-being of Africans, and that should be the constant. And therefore, it's not a choice between the West and China. Who meets our interests? Who does not? And if we have concerns, we raise them. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And then our last speaker is going to be, I don't know, Prof. Akopome.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just build quickly on the train of thought that we have followed. And I would say it behooves us as Africans and the Chinese to decide to make concerted and conscious narratives that target the people-to-people domain. Of course, Prof. Zondi's suggestions are very, very germane in this regard. And the very last speaker, my brother Weston Shilaho's comments are very germane. But I don't think we need to dance away from the fact that it is in our benefit in the current global geopolitical calculus to have a good relationship. Regardless of these challenges, as Prof. Zondi has made us know, these challenges will continue. Africans will experience racism from other parts of the world. Africans will also show racism to themselves, as Prof. Zondi has reminded us, issues of xenophobia. And it's not a one-way street. In this business, there really are no saints. But we must think in the long term that it doesn't do us any good to withdraw from a relationship with China. It doesn't do China any good either for their own national interest in the global political calculus to not respond to African concerns as they express them. So, and I think it has to go beyond the official, the seminar room and the government rooms, because these things are happening where I think it matters the most. I'll just say that because we are out of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're running out of time, and I think we're going to pick up these debates, for other webinar public dialogues in future, taking different dimensions. I think a number of interesting issues that are coming up. But let me take this opportunity in the interest of time to invite Baso to give us a vote of thanks.
Sure. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We always are honored to host you on these seminars, and we look forward to doing so for the extent of the lockdown and beyond the lockdown. And of course, these proceedings will be put up on the university YouTube page, so you can re-engage some of these topics over there. So I would like to thank the three speakers today, Prof. Zondi, Prof. Cheng, and Prof. Chin. I think they've enriched the debate, and they've given us a lot of concepts, a lot of context through which to understand and to frame these issues. I would also like to thank our strategic partners, the University of Johannesburg Library, the Library of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and I think they've certainly lived up to that name for the duration of the lockdown. I'd also, of course, like to thank the chair, our co-director, Dr. David Monyae, co-director of the Center for Africa-China Studies and the UJ Confucius Institute, as well as Prof. Peng, the other co-director, for always encouraging these kinds of engagements, because we are a research institute, but we also operate within a certain socioeconomic and political context, and therefore have a role to play in society and in the discourse. And of course, we'd like to thank all of you for attending and elevating these issues. Somebody said in the comments that the time is too limited to fully and completely and comprehensively engage with these issues, and we completely agree. And that's why we look forward to future engagements. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.